Let's begin our business of shaping policy and advancing development for today by looking at the latest development in South Africa, the decision by the US Deputy Secretary, Treasury Secretary to visit South Africa. What is the significance of this visit at this time? Is the timing right for the visit? And what will be the impact on the continent itself, which is Africa? Let's see what our in-house analysts we have to say about this. We are being joined by Dr. Idahosa Osamanzi, as usual. Glad to have you join us this morning.
Good morning, Femi. Blessing, good morning. My pleasure to be on set this morning again.
It's like
Friday-ish.
You can imagine. Well, we have to...
The weekend is loading, so
somehow
it's obvious you are getting set for it.
Don't worry, I'll take you away after the show.
Oh my God.
All right, let's get to business. Looking at the visit of the US Deputy Treasury Secretary to South Africa, let's even start with the personality or the persona of Wale Adeyemo. They call him Wale. Of course, that's their own version. But I would prefer to say Wale Adeyemo. He is the first U.S. black Deputy Secretary to occupy that office. How significant is that for in Nigeria to occupy that kind of office? And then let's also look at the significance of this visit or his choice for this kind of visit to South Africa. Let's start with that.
Well, I think Wale's position in the Treasury in the U.S. Is something that, for us, again, points us to a very important fact which we have to contend as a people real at home, looking at who solve your problem. And it's really not the color of the skin, but the content of the mind of the person who is occupying that office. And so merit is what it is in the U.S. And look at somebody who has capacity, who is able to deliver value. And so the democracy is quite inclusive. It has nothing to do with ethnicity or religious bias. As long as you have the solution, the U.S. look out for you, and then they can actually invest heavily in you to continue to produce results for their economy. And I think that's, for me, what we really need to learn from as African countries, because this over dependence on mediocrity to solve problems can somehow slow down civilization. So that level of inclusiveness for me is a plus for the American. They really don't care where you are coming from, as long as you have the solution.
To attract investment.
That's quite a liberal society. Anything that works, as far as they are concerned, is good. And so it's given the opportunity to try. And again, we must also take it from the point of view of the eventual success of the civil rights movement of the early 1960s, when Martin Luther King Jr. and his friends started the protest of inclusion in America, that the black community are engaged. And right from the days of Obama, we are seeing more of black people. Even in Donald Trump's cabinet, we also have a lot of black people who also featured and they hold key positions. So it's point to the fact that the American society is becoming really inclusive, and of course merit most of the time. Although of course politics is also involved to a lesser degree, putting people square pegs in square hole.
All right, so the U.S. Deputy Treasury Secretary visiting South Africa, it's more like, okay, your brother's coming to talk to you, even though that brother originally is not from your country, but is a fellow African. And now he actually spoke to them like one who has been part of their history, taking them back to the apartheid time when late Nelson Mandela was released from prison, how that inspired him. But one thing that he actually talked about in that meeting with South Africa was the economic development of not just some people, but every part of South Africa, how it is key to the US and the United States. So what do you think would be the fallout from these meetings?
Well, for me, yeah, the the speech of Wale Adeyemo, quite inspirational, really, and this is the for some of us who do study interpretations in persuasive speech. You know, the words, the choice of your word are very important. The kind of emotive content you put into it, and then your character really makes this quite convincing. So when in theology they call it the concept of the logos, the pathos, and the ethos. Now, you see in that conversation, these three elements in every persuasive speech was just present. Now, you look at the character because it's a black person, is your brother, you know, and now he put some emotion into some of this conversation. See how elated he was 35 years ago, watching on a small box of television, seeing jubilations and Nelson Mandela being free. Now, you see, the feeling of nostalgia comes from those who are hearing it and say, oh, wow, you know, he really feels us. So all these are put in there. But we must not take away the real essence of that journey, which is shuttle diplomacy. And don't forget that in recent time that South Africa is a prominent member of the BRIC nations. And BRICS is fighting against the dollar as we speak, looking now for a gold-backed currency to challenge the dollar, because the biggest problem that the world is having is the dollarization of commercial activity in the world. And so people want to see how to break the monopoly of the dollar. And of course, at the heart of this conversation is South Africa. So coming to South Africa for me is a form of shuttle diplomacy, and to say, oh, we are still brothers, we want to solve problems together. Yeah, we look at the volume of trade in 2022, of course, as he presented it, through AGOA, South Africa would have gotten about 3 billion into the US. But on the other hand, if you also look at the figure, export from US to South Africa for 2022 was worth over 6.1 billion US dollars. So, in terms of trade balance, you still see is in favor of the US. So all these are the issues here that before the South African people. So yes, he put it at the point there. Here he identified with the issues in South Africa, that there's no light, and of course there's no way people can grow without light. He talks about the greening of South Africa, the energy transition. Of course, don't forget that recently, of course, again through the JET-P program, they have offered 2 billion through the ADB to South Africa for this energy transition. So they're saying, oh, you need energy transition, and more importantly, that from what he said and all the conversation he heard from South Africa, that the reason why there's no light in South Africa is not because of capacity, it's not because that they don't have the finance, it's just because that some people are corrupt. And so these are the issues that, of course, he put on the table for the South African. But how the South African people see this is purely a different ball game altogether. But that relationship, he said, this friendship has been there over time. And we want to continue to maintain this relationship. But like I keep asking, yes, if you have been in a relationship for so long a time and it has not helped your destiny, I think somehow you need to change the relationship and move on to something else that can actually favor you. Now, this is the position of South Africa in BRICS, and I think that it will be more strategic for them really to think with their new friends rather than rely on old allies that have really not helped issues.
Is it really, would you really say that the relationship hasn't helped both of them? Because you mentioned the AGOA Act, the African Growth Opportunity Act, which has also created ease for South African products to have easy access to the American markets.
Yeah, but you see, we need to also do the analysis of those products that is making access to the market. Are they manufactured products? Are they just the pure diamond that we're taking from the soil, or they are just the gold that we're taking from South Africa, getting into the American market? So these are all the conversations we need to have. You see, if you're building capacity in South Africa, it will be seen in finished goods. The presence of America in Japan is known. The presence of America in Taiwan is known. And you're seeing their money doing some great thing there. If you go to places like Singapore, their presence is known. So we also need to feel such presence in Africa.
Why is the presence not felt? If the presence is felt in other countries, but when it comes to African countries, it's not felt. So who's not doing their own role, or who's not doing what should be done?
Well, again, it may not be the problem with the Americans alone. It's also the fact that the low-value system in Africa is a very big problem. African leaders have not demonstrated capacity to be able to negotiate. And every time we get into negotiation, like Mensah Otabi talks about in his book, By the Future, we go into negotiation with empty stomach. So once you're going into negotiation with empty stomach, the chances that you are not going to get the real value from that negotiation is very high. So this is a challenge that Africans face. So when you're going to negotiate, you're not negotiating from the point of strength. You're always going there to beg. So they give you conditions, and those conditions, because you don't have option, you have to take anything they give to you. But these other places, do have options. And because they have options, they insist on what works. And this is really where African leaders are not doing quite well, really, to say, okay, we want to make purchases, we want to do business together. Yes, we are ready to do business together, but this is the term upon which our businesses are going to be done. And once we can stick with those terms, if they say they are not taking it, then we take it to people who are willing to buy. But because we are hungry and we need it now, like Esau, give me this red pottage or I will die, then of course, at the end of the day, you can actually throw away your birthright just because for a small portion of a red pottage.
All right, before we go further, let's just give our viewers the privilege of, watching that charismatic public speech from Wale Adeyemo. And the soundbite is ready. So let's take a listen.
To attract investment dollars need to be mindful of risk. And the steps that you are taking to address the risks associated with illicit finance and also with the countering the financing of terrorism are important steps that will lead to attracting more capital from the United States, but more capital from around the world. And the United States wants to be your partner in doing this work. Ultimately, the United States and South African relationship is deep and broad and covers several issues, but at its core must be our joint interest in addressing inequality in both of our economies.
All right, that's Wale Adeyemo, who talks about the significance of the relationship between the U.S. and South Africa. Let me take you to Hidauza, who is here with us. He talked about the significance of this relationship and the need to strengthen this, relationship between these two countries. But let's look at the timing of this visit. Some would term it to be political, while some would say, oh, there is objectivity in this visit. What do you think?
Yeah, but like I said to you, it's a shuttle diplomacy. And in diplomatic context, we're no longer fighting. So it's either you are talking politics or you are talking economy. And these also hold very significant political collateral for the Democrats. That, of course, was strengthening ties with Africa. The other day, Blinken was in Nigeria, and then this visit is all going around and to say, oh, we're strengthening our ties with our people. And, of course, Wale Adeyemo is a Nigerian and is voting in America, so there's a whole lot of Nigerian voting population. There are a lot of South Africa who are in America. And of course, and they're also voting. So there's a need, and of course, when you look at it in terms of economic strength, you see Nigeria, you see South Africa, you see Egypt having real strong muscle in terms of GDP contribution to the African wealth. So these are very critical states, and it's showing also to say, oh, we're friends of Africa, and therefore we still convert the black vote the way we did the last time. So all those things, we cannot take it from the radar. But I think most importantly for me, really, is more economic than political, as it were, because of the moves that are actually going on in the BRICS right now. What we see in the speech, these are the open things, but what goes on at the back of the camera, we will not be able to to be able to say what conversation actually are happening or what people are signing. But I think that it's more toward a reaction to say America to say, yes, let's maintain a multipolar world. Let's not go this bipolar arrangement where you are having a single currency fighting against the dollar, because the American economy, as we speak, is actually very weak. And therefore, like you know, the dominance or the hedgeability of any currency will be dependent on the strength of your economy. And so when you win a major war, as part of the booty, your currency become the trading currency. But now that people are beginning to wake up to say, look, must we all sell in American dollar? So there's a challenge. We have moved from gold to dollar. Now people are saying, okay, gold is even better because we have more gold in our backyard. So we can use gold reserve and let's go back to the original system. So this is a challenge to the American economy. And of course, as long as people are no longer dollarizing their economy, the dominance of America will sure win. And of course, don't forget that the critical enemy of America are also there in BRIC. China is there, Russia is there. And of course, although India is neither here nor there, but of course we know that India is more on the side of the Asia than they are of the West. So these are conversations for me which also are important for America to see how they can struggle themselves out of the economic quagmire they've also found themselves at the moment.
So at the end of this visit, do you see South Africa also playing neither here nor there, being that America is trying to sweet-talk it into a deeper relationship?
Well, of course, South Africa has actually been respecting the covenant between them and the United States of America. If you remember the last time South Africa was to hold BRICS, and of course Russia was supposed to attend that meeting, the South African government had to prevail on Russia not to come. Putin was supposed to be in that meeting. But of course, because of the pressure from America, you saw that they have to prevail on Putin that he cannot come to South Africa because they couldn't guarantee his security and safety. And so Putin has to stay. So of course, in international politics, like we say, there's no permanent friend, there's no permanent enemy. What is constant is permanent interest. So as long as you are getting something, you have to maintain that relationship. So I do hope that South Africa, to a very large extent, is also still talking here and talking there. But time will tell. And that will be dependent on what kind of support that South Africa begins to get from these Asia and Eastern European friends. And once these things start to come in and it surpasses what is coming from the West, and I think it's possible for them to take a stand.
So now let's look at the highlights of his speech. He talked about, if I was surprised, the first thing he talked about or addressed is the issue of corruption. He said he has done his findings and discovered that some of the developmental projects in South Africa, especially that has to do with energy and the rest of them, the greatest problem has to do with the issue of corruption. How do you react to this?
Well, it's one thing that many Africans we have to grapple with, the issue of corruption. I have always had my own way of looking at the issue of corruption, the way the narrative is anchored from the West. And I think it's not a study he did, it's the feelers he got from the people. And that's not unusual. One of the things that stuns me most of the time is that when you get into an environment and the way people are talking to you, and that's why I talk about going into negotiation with an empty stomach, and you are looking as if people have to be very sympathetic to you. So many narratives we find in Africa, and many of these narratives are not true. I was having a conversation with my friend last night, and for over an hour on the telephone, and looking at some of the commentary that people run about ourselves without necessarily understanding their implications and impact on relations among nations. So when you come and you have to speak with your opposition party and they tell you everything here is corrupt, just imagine like what is happening at our National Assembly. Budget is presented, details of the budget are there, and somebody is coming out to say, oh, figures are coming, that the one they are operating is different from the one that was passed. Complete misinformation. And of course, this is done. And now you see the narrative in the media is, Senate suspended this person because they have to cover up this kind of crime. So it looks and presents a kind of a scenario that all we do in Africa is cheating. But the real things that we have not looked at is the fundamentals of why some of these projects that are inherited from the West are not succeeding in Africa. Because you look at it, you are giving me $2 billion to do a project. You are going to ship some equipment to me. I'm not going to determine what cost is going to be paid. You're going to ship expertise to me in form of consultancy, which of course is going to take part of that same money. And at the end of the day, what is actually left in terms of delivering on the value of this contract is really neither here nor there. Now, this issue also Africa need to also examine. It's not that people just take this money and line up their pockets. So, again, you look at it from the point of view of the fact that we're moving from a white denominated regime and to the black. And I think after Nelson Mandela, really, successive leadership in South Africa, we're not really able to manage the crisis or the haughty feeling that came from apartheid. Nelson Mandela did well, and I think that's what actually put him on the world map as one of the greatest leaders that has ever lived. And I don't know if any of you have watched the movie Invictus by Nelson Mandela. So that gives you a picture of how Nelson Mandela was able to really navigate around the conflict in South Africa, because he knew that these white guys who had the key to the administration for this number of years, you can't just wish them away. Otherwise, they will sabotage you and they will fail. I remember a scene in that movie when, of course, on the day he was inaugurated, and there was a paper publication, and he said it's not to win election, but it's to run a government. And in that scene of the movie, a whole lot of the people that were around him, they were actually very angry that they have not even allowed this man to enter into office. This is the first day of resumption. And look at the kind of news that is coming from them. And Nelson Mandela looked and said to them, it's a valid question.
All right. Let's go deeper into the valid question and take it to what Nelson Mandela said. It is not to win election. It is to run a government. Now, the issues of corruption in South Africa, it is not particular to South Africa. We find that in almost every country of the world, even though it happens at different levels. But for countries in Africa and African countries, what is the issue with running a government that does not create or does not allow the enabling environment for corruption to thrive and hinder progress or growth?
Yeah, but that's the point I'm trying actually making. Because even in the US, look at the last elections, after the last elections, and all the kind of effort trying to see what role that Joe Biden's son is playing in terms of business deal with South Africa and all of those. America don't call it corruption in their own case. But you see, this is the narrative that is driven. They also having failed projects. So for me, him calling us out as if our biggest problem is corruption, for me, it's not...
Is that stereotyping?
Yeah, I think so, really. I think it's just designed to stereotype us as a people, to say, oh, we are very bad people, and that's why we're not making progress. But I think there are a lot of good things that we can talk about ourselves rather than corruption. Because what you look at as corruption, most of the time, may not really be what people think about corruption. And that is because the perception people have of themselves. Because TI is measuring perception. Perception is not reality. It's what people think. When you go on the street of Nigeria and ask an average Nigerian, for example, today, is your country corrupt? They don't need to even know the value. They can sit in the house and say, what Buhari took, what Jonathan did was a child's play. Because really, the way we see our people, we demarket ourselves. And that's why I started by saying that what we are good at as Africa is talking down on ourselves before foreigners. Maybe because of the kind of favor we are expecting that they should give to us, or things like that. But we also understand the reality that we have to grapple with, and this is the real issue, to see if we are taking just ordinary our resource from the ground and taking it into the West, they process it and they sell it back to us at very expensive prices, and we don't get value for what we are having, and they have technology and they don't want to share with us, and they don't want to set up factory around us so that those things can be produced within us and create economy around us, and then they come back to tell us that we are corrupt. I think, for me, that stereotyping should cease, and it should not even come from a black man like Adeyemo.
Let's look at the unemployment rate in South Africa, which is at 43%. And if you look at the peculiarity of the statistics, it's more prevalent among young people who are less than 35. How do you react to this? You also made reference to it.
You see, this again is another problem that we also will need to deal with. How do they really calculate this unemployment rate? And you say UK has a 4.2% unemployment rate, and South Africa has 44% unemployment rate. Is it the government in America that is fitting the 44%? Or the UK government that is fitting the 44%?
43%.
You see, because they have accounted for their informal sectors as workers, as employed. And the informal sector in Africa are not accounted for.
So whose fault is that the data is not there?
Yeah, this is the real issue. So you say, oh, somebody is unemployed, but how do you get a figure? You say 44%. Yeah, what that volume is?
That's almost like half the population.
Population doing nothing? That cannot be true. These are narratives that African leaders need to refute. Because you see, there are a whole lot of people who are doing small things to get, and they are earning living. People who are doing menial job are called employee. House help are targeted as employee in this advanced country. They are called caregiver. You give them very big name. But they are not different from people who do house help here. So how do you not class one who is here unemployed and the one that is here employed? So I think this, of me again, is another stereotyping. African basically is built on the informal sector. And people are earning living one way or the other. So these are the things that we also will need to account for. How much they are paid is a different ballgame entirely. But the fact that they are doing something to earn a living is not something we can wish away. So those figures for me are also very questionable.
All right, so the US has the African Growth Opportunity Act. But in that, the products that Africa can trade with the US, you may consider that not really of a high product that will yield high volume of money, or high amount of money. But what should Africa have as some form of agreement regarding trade, that it can have valuable trade, that in the balance of trade, it favors Africa?
You know, that's again something that is difficult to think with. Why do I say so? Somebody has a yam, he has a knife. So he can only cut for you
the size he
wants you to get. This is what the AGOA Act is all about. You see, we must not take away the hypocrisy in some of all these processes. Yes, talking to South Africa, but I will always want to use Nigeria experience. Some products that are coming from you, they say, oh, they are carcinogenic, and therefore you cannot receive it. It can't enter into America. Even when it is listed in those 7,000 items that can move from your country to them. They know what they want, and they know what they need from you. So you are really not in a better position to determine what enters into their country. And they keep raising the bar so that you will never meet up with the standard. So this is for me why I feel really Africans should trade more with themselves. I still believe that what Africa needs is another kind of a Marshall Plan which built Europe, that encouraged Europeans to trade among themselves. that they create links among themselves and they were trading among themselves and they built up the entire of Europe. That's what Africa really need. I was talking with a friend of mine in Casablanca the other day, and he said to me, and she said, oh, and I asked, have you been to Nigeria before? He said, not in my life. And I said, why? I see you in Israel, I see you in Khartoum, I see you all across the globe. He said, but my brother, this is the problem. Traveling between Africa, the ticket alone is enough for me to do a full vacation in Mexico.
But it shouldn't be, because the distance
isn't
as much as
traveling
overseas.
Oh yeah, this is what it is. So if you're flying from here to Ghana, you look at it. People are paying 400,000 to fly from Lagos to Abuja. Just an hour flight. So you see this deliberate manipulation of Africa is what we really need to work with. How do we relax rules for ourselves? How do we interconnect that African, first and foremost, trade among themselves, build up critical mass of wealth and energy, develop our own technology, and then, of course, we will say, oh, we sit down on the table as equal partner, not one hungry and one well-fed.
All right, let's look at the relationship between South Africa and the US, which has been an age-long partnership. But do you think the decision by South Africa to be a member of the BRICS nation would further deplete this relationship, or what might likely occur with this kind of influence?
Well, since the birth of the new world order after the First and Second World War, that brought the United Nations into being, and of course, we had the international law allowing people to relate with other people of the world, and sovereign nations are sovereign by their right, and they can determine who their friends or who their enemy could be. So Africa has been in that mix for a very long time. At a certain point in our history, we decided to say, oh, we were neutral. And of course, really, in the game of international politics and economy, there's actually no neutrality, because you have to either be somewhere, or somebody is today you to say, oh, we're neutral. Then it was called the non-aligned movement. And South Africa and the whole lot of third world countries massed themselves together and said, oh, we didn't want to participate between the West and the East. And here it was, but it didn't really pay off for anybody, as it were. So I think what it is that South Africa is also looking now to say, where can we make more opportunity and leverage? Who is actually having money? And if you ask me today who is having money, China has a lot of money, because, see, all across the world, across the globe, Chinese is the world that's actually having the wealth right now. And if the wealth is in the hands of China, it is better for you to go and lug around a man who has money and the one who has nothing to offer anymore. So for me, South Africa in BRICS is also looking at the potentials that it can actually get, and who is actually willing to actually help you really grow. And you see the footprint of China across Africa, really investing in terms of infrastructure. At least you read in the morning news just now how, of course, Chinese CCC is also building infrastructure across the West African coast. All these investment is actually happening in real time. That South Africa bring in, yes, their equipment, they bring in their men, and they are building huge infrastructure. We've not seen that happen from the West since African was born. And this, for me, is also very strategic. And nations should think about themselves. Like we say in International Relations 101, foreign policy is an extension of a nation's domestic policy. So why do government exist? Government exists for the welfare and the well-being of its citizens. And so wherever or whoever that can support and push that objective principle of the state And I think states should be able to relax because, like I said, in politics, no permanent friend, no permanent enemy. What is permanent is interest. And if the interest of the citizen overrides any relationship, and I don't think that relationship needs to be in place.
All right, let me take you back to what you said earlier when we're talking about the personality of Wale Adeyemo. Now, he was born a Nigerian, but now he's an American and is the Deputy Treasury Secretary of the US. The pattern that the US has employed, or that they use, the UK uses that as well. You may not be originally from that country, but once you become a citizen, you can vie for political office. Bring it back to Africa and then to Nigeria. We'll find that it's almost the opposite in a place like Nigeria, where sometimes even someone from a particular state, I think it's only in Lagos State that you may not necessarily be originally from Lagos State that you can hold political office. Even in institutions where heads of the institution has to be appointed, sometimes there is tribal sentiment. You find that they want the dominant tribe in that place to head the space. What is the implication of this trend on growth?
Yeah, really, if you look at it in Africa, one of the key things that has happened to us is the fragmentation, which of course sometimes in the study of colonialism they call it the divide and rule approach of Britain in dealing with their SY colonial masters. You fragment people and cause divisions among them. I was in Rwanda Genocide Memorial, and this narrator was giving us this history, how people of Rwanda were raised against themselves by the colonizing powers. That the tribe that you call in Rwanda today that were killing themselves, the Hutu, the Tutsis, that they were actually one blood. That the government came and separated by the number of cows that they hold. Those who have above 10 cows became the Tutsi, the ruling class. And those who had less than 10 cows became Hutus. And you see that, for example, in Nigeria. Look at the balkanization of our state, for example. You get to Enugu State, you see Benue people in Enugu State, and you see Enugu people in Benue State. You go to Edo State, you see Edo State in Benue State, you see them in Kogi State. Edo people. So this division of the lines, there are really fault lines really now. That is what is pulling us asunder. So while they are building themselves together, but they are encouraging the fractionalization of these people, because the more fractionalized we become, the more weaker we are to be exploited. And this is actually the gimmick of the colonial masters, and that has stayed with us. And what baffles me really as a person is the fact that for 60 years after independence, we really cannot sit down as a people to rethink these boundaries, artificial boundaries that were created by foreigners. So it's unfortunate, real unfortunate. But I see what India has done really today. Yes, you are free to migrate and go to anywhere you want to go, but you can't hold Indian nationality and hold another country nationality.
So choose where you want to
choose
belong.
where you want to belong. So if you say you want to be an American, you want American passport, drop our own Indian passport, and they delist you from being a citizen of India. So I think that's where we also need to get to. So we know who is a Nigerian and who is not a Nigerian. All these people are carrying maroon passports to come and be doing ministers here in Nigeria. We should not allow it. So if you want to be an American, go ahead and be American. So don't have influence on us. Don't even call us that you are our brother, because that's what India is doing at the moment. So you can't hold Indian passport and say you are holding another country nationality. And what have they done? They've said to you, wherever you work and you hold Indian passport, the tax comes straight to India. It doesn't matter whichever country you are. So this is also helping the Indian economy to grow. And not many Indians want to lose their nationality. So they will prefer to remain Indian and work elsewhere than being citizen and having or carrying dual citizenship. And I think this is one thing that we also need to do. So we must be able to identify with ourselves and see what can we do, who can actually contribute. There are a whole lot of mechanisms that were put in place to see how we can actually mediate some of these inter-ethnic crises in Africa. One of such in Nigeria, for example, was the federal character, what they call the quota principle, to see that every part of the nationalities are represented. But of course, that has been bastardized. I was speaking with a group of people the other day and I said to them, yeah, we have a federal character. How do we really generate patriotism for our younger people? And I gave an example. My son did an entrance into King's College and he wanted to get admission into King's College. And he moved with some of his friends. They went to the exam center together. They both know what they scored to gain admission. He scored 166. And he was denied admission because he's from Edo State. And found out that some of his friends who scored less than 100 gained admission into the system because they were from other states. And I asked, how do I explain to that young child that's in Nigeria? It's difficult. Because he's already seeing injustice in the system. Now, what we should do is, yes, we agree that there's a need to balance up, that everybody is represented. But that does not remove from the criteria for qualification. It has to be the same. So if the cutoff point is 200, everybody who gets into the system gets 200. So it's based purely on merit. And this is what we are not driving in our environment. So we are encouraging mediocrity. Now you imagine that a student who is an A brain sitting in class with a D on an E brain, and they are going to go through the system and then they go to compete in the same market. So this is a problem, and I think those are some of the things that Africans really need to look at. While we are thinking of inclusion, we must also think merit along. And I think that's what stands out for the United States of America, that it really don't matter where you are coming from, as long as you can add value to the system, as long as you have something in the head, the system will find a way to make you comfortable to contribute to the development and the growth of that system. And that's why you see a whole lot of people. Elon Musk is from South Africa, and it's not ashamed to say he's a South African. It's not an American. So, but he's contributing. And he says he's paying tax that is over $1 billion annually to the American government. So he's not ashamed to be a South African. But of course, the environment has created the ecosystem to make profit and is contributing. And of course, the system values the contribution. And I think that's where we need to actually up our game if we want to actually move from where we are to be in that desired destination that all of us are praying for.
All right. Let's talk about the power supply in South Africa, which Adeyemo also made reference. And I would love to quote him. He said, South Africa needs to summon the political will to make decisions needed to modernize its electrical grid and enable new generation sources to come online.
Yeah, again, it's a function of how much money you are earning. We know what money comes to South Africa, and he feels that South Africa has all the money to invest in the infrastructure. And I think if they have, they should have really done so. Although the infrastructures are becoming moribund. Don't forget, these are built during the apartheid time, and government is not maintaining. And that's one big problem again in Africa. Maintenance culture is very poor. And we don't upgrade technology as it were. And then we quickly get out of fashion. And this is because of the way we see proceed from business. Most Africans are not able to actually distinguish what actually is the profit that you hold to a business, and you see that once money is coming, and we keep spending it, and money is meant to be spent. Most of the time, money is not meant to be spent. People are supposed to understand that the principle of money is that you have to multiply it. And multiplying money means that even if you have made profit, you are not going to spend the entire profit. And we see that happen to us from time to time. I say to people, look at it. People complain about textile industry today and say, oh, all our textiles are dead. Our textile did not die because we decide to buy Chinese products. Our textile died because there were no investment in that sector. We were using old machines that were out of tune, that their parts were no longer available, while other people were moving to newer technology. But because when money was coming and we were eating it and we didn't save, to be able to invest in the future, we see that we were left behind. And so newer technology came that are simpler, that are cheaper, and is producing these things cheaper, and you are relying on an old technology that is more expensive, and the process is longer, so you can't be competitive. So if you have to be competitive, you have to invest in new technology. As the technology is moving, you have to study the trend, and that makes the process simpler, shorter, and then of course you can maximize profit. And I think this is what we really need to train or teach to our entrepreneurs, that people are making money, and rather than think of how to invest in the process, feeding the goose that is laying the golden egg, we will be building structures that have no economic values. One person built an estate that is not commercial, and he says it's a retirement home. And this, of course, you are not investing in technology in the process. And of course, we know today technology is changing and shifting. And before you know it, you are out of radar. We can't see you again because you are down at the bottom. And then you are looking for more money to borrow, to go do IPO, to invest. And this is what, and the cycle that we have been going through as African businesses. And I think this is one of the issues, of course, again, that has happened to South Africa, that we are enjoying something and we don't see the need to invest and develop along the technological progress in that line. And then all of a sudden we discover that maintenance become a problem. You can no longer sustain it. And then South Africa that used to be littered now is in darkness.
What a sad story. We do hope that that changes quickly for South Africa, and we hope there will be good fruits from the visit of the US Treasury Secretary Wale Adeyemo for South Africa and also for the US. Thank you very much, Dausa Osamaze, who's been resource person this morning, providing quality insight on the visits of the U.S. Treasury Secretary Wale Adeyemo to South Africa.
Thank you, Blessing. Femi, a pleasure to be in between two of you.
Early exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.